Planet America's fake news.
What the hell is going on here?
Hello there, welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
I'm Chaz Licciardello.
This week, more damaging testimony for the president as the impeachment inquiry steps up.
Also this week, things are getting serious for 2020 Democrats as they head back to First to Vote Iowa.
He or she can come to Iowa and meet enough people that perhaps they can get finished first, second, third, fourth.
In the history department, I'll look at the lessons from the re-election of George W. Bush.
And I'll be taking a deep dive into the worryingly warm waters of the Arctic.
Climate change is really changing the physical geography of the Arctic in a significant way.
But first, can we just give that a nudge? Hey, that's good.
After weeks of resisting pressure to hold a formal vote for an impeachment inquiry, this week Democratic Speaker Nancy Pelosi unveiled a resolution outlining the road ahead. Public hearings, the release of depositions and the process for consideration of possible articles of impeachment. It went to a vote in the House earlier today. Republicans all held the line opposing the resolution. 2 Democrats voted nay, but it passed easily. Speaker Pelosi says no decision has yet been made on whether to hold a final impeachment vote.
The inquiry proceeds. We'll decide whether we'll go forward with impeachment. That decision has not been made.
Meanwhile, just hours before he was due to testify this morning, National Security Council official Tim Morrison, the president's senior advisor on Russia and Europe, announced he was resigning from his White House post. But in his testimony, Morrison essentially agreed with evidence of a quid pro quo presented last week by Bill Taylor, America's top diplomat in Ukraine, saying he can confirm the substance of Taylor's statement is accurate. Morrison wasn't exactly looking to drop the president in it, though, saying he did not think the quid pro quo discussed in the July 25th phone call was illegal. It is worth noting, though, that legality isn't really the issue for Democrats. Impeachment for abuse of power does not require illegality. Earlier in the week, the House committee members heard closed-door evidence from the top Ukraine expert on the National Security Council, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, despite White House attempts to block his testimony.
He was in the Situation Room listening in on the July 25th Ukraine call. In his opening statement, Vindman says he was so concerned by what he heard on that call that he reported it to the National Security Council's lead counsel.
According to the Washington Post, moments after the call was completed, Vindman told White House counsel John Eisenberg of his concerns, and Eisenberg proposed moving the transcript of the call to a highly classified server and restricting any access to it. Vindman then told members of Congress why he was alarmed by the conversations involving Presidents Trump and Zelensky on July 25. Vindman said he realised that if Ukraine pursues an investigation into the Bidens and Burisma, the natural gas company where Hunter Biden had been a board member, it would be interpreted as a partisan play and result in Ukraine losing bipartisan support. And that, Vindman said, would also undermine US national security. According to the New York Times, Vindman later testified that the White House transcript of the July 25 call, which Vindman was listening in to, omitted crucial words and phrases, including a number of references to Joe Biden and Burisma. And that Vindman tried and failed to change the transcript to reflect those omissions.
And that's important because right now Trump's defense largely consists of him yelling at people on Twitter to read the transcript. So if the rough transcript is misleading, then that's an issue. We should say, though, that according to Tim Morrison's memory, the rough transcript accurately and completely reflected the substance of the call. So there is that.
Yes, release the transcript. Meanwhile, over on Fox News, Laura Ingraham and her panel questioned Vindman's credibility and his loyalty to America, given he was born in Ukraine.
Here we have a U.S. national security official who is advising Ukraine while working inside the White House, apparently against the president's interest, and usually they spoke in English. Isn't that kind of an interesting angle on this story?
I find that astounding, and some people might call that espionage.
And that, by the way, was John Yoo, best known for his work as a lawyer in the Bush administration, where he wrote the so-called torture memo, which provided the legal justification for enhanced interrogation techniques. And Vindman, by the way, came to America at the age of 3. He served in Iraq and was awarded the Purple Heart for his wounds suffered there. Yu's comments were too much for Liz Cheney, a staunch, loyal Trump foot soldier and daughter, of course, of Bush's Vice President Dick Cheney.
I also want to say a word about something else that's been going on over the course of the last several hours and last night, which I think is also shameful. And that is questioning the patriotism, questioning the dedication to country of people like Mr. Vindman.
Well, you later released a statement saying, I did not accuse Colonel Vindman of committing the crime of espionage. I meant to say that it sounded like an espionage operation by the Ukrainians. I guess we'd need a stress position and a bucket of water to know if he's telling us the truth, Chaz.
Wow, it's always the quiet ones. 2 other notes from Vindman's testimony, though. Last week we mentioned another phone call between Zelensky and Trump from back in May that might have been worth following up on. Well, Vindman heard that phone call and he said it was positive. He had no problems with it. Some might say the call was perfect. So that's good for Trump. Not so good for Trump, though. Vindman was also part of the infamous July 10 meeting when Ambassador Sondland is said to have pressured the Ukrainians to investigate the Bidens, and Bolton is said to have tried to shut things down. Well, not only did Vindman testify that he personally witnessed Sondland emphasising to the Ukrainians the importance of Biden investigations, but he also testified that he witnessed Fiona Hill telling Sondland his statements were inappropriate. And the reason that's important is because Sondland testified that he took no part in any effort to encourage an investigation into the Bidens. And he also testified that neither Hill nor Bolton shared any critical comments with him. So that makes 2 against 1, with Bolton's testimony to come. And if the Dems can put some perjury pressure on Sondland, they'll be hoping they can make him flip on Trump.
Like a pancake. White House lawyer John Eisenberg and Mike Ellis have both been asked to testify next week, as has the former National Security Advisor John Bolton. We do not know if any of the above are planning to show up or not. Finally, Chaz, you got some breaking news.
I do. It appears as if the whistleblower has just been outed. Real Clear Investigations has gone public with a name that seems to be an open secret in Washington, that of Eric Charamella, a CIA analyst who is very much a Democrat, very much worked with Joe Biden, very much worked for Never Trumper John Brennan, and very much has had the bulk of his complaints subsequently confirmed. So I'm not sure his identity actually matters, but I think he's about to become very much famous, so we might be coming back to him in future weeks.
Yeah, indeed we might. Well, we're getting down to crunch time in the Democratic primary campaign now. This is the period where we'll find out which of the candidates have the money and momentum for a final push into the early primary states next February, and which are basically running out of steam. And for some, that means some serious questions about whether they can continue into the new year or not. For others, they still need to cut costs, refocus, and try and find a more successful strategy before time and money runs out. Right now, there aren't many campaigns that'd be feeling that happy. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in particular are feeling the squeeze. In the polls, Biden is the front runner, but he's basically running out of money with less than half the cash on hand of either of his main rivals, Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders. This week, Biden announced that he would accept money from a new super PAC, Unite the Country, which launched a new TV spot supporting Biden.
Stand up. Take it back. We can, in fact, do anything we set our mind to. This is the United States of America.
Well, they're right about that.
It is the United States of America, sure.
I tell you what, though, that super PAC ad makes me want to pull out a copy of Joe Biden's book, Promise Me Dad, and have a good old read.
It's a page turner.
Biden for president was going to reject the super PAC system. I knew there was big money out there for me, but I also knew people were sick of it all. We the people didn't ring so true anymore. It was more like we the donors. Foolhardy or not, I was going to try to upend the new money rush that was overwhelming our politics. I hope that wasn't the promise he made in his book. Yeah. The super PAC isn't even going to help Biden that much because his problem is campaign spending. In the third quarter, Biden spent almost $18 million, even though he only raised $16 million, and almost none of that was on ads. So that's why he's got no money left. Biden's other problem, by the way, is that these stories about his son Hunter profiting off his vice presidency, they're still emerging. Apparently in 2007, Biden contacted DHS and expressed concern about their proposed chemical security regulations in a particular bill. Well, it turns out a group that hired Hunter Biden's lobbying firm had concerns about the exact same issue. How about that? Also in 2007, Biden sent the Attorney General a letter hoping to expand the federal fingerprint background check system. Well, guess what Hunter's lobbying firm were pushing for at the time, courtesy of one of their clients. It doesn't necessarily mean Joe's actions were related, of course, but it's a small world, John.
Yeah, particularly when your kid's lobbying you. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris's campaign announced this week it is letting go dozens of staff, restructuring their campaign and redeploying other staff to Iowa. Harris campaign director Juan Rodriguez is also cutting his own salary and has sent staff a memo trying to reassure them that plenty of winning primary campaigns like John Kerry's in 2004 and John McCain's in 2008 have had to make tough choices on their way to the nomination. And this is no different. Although Rodriguez didn't actually point out both Kerry and McCain lost the election at the end of the day.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on with Harris's campaign, but I'm pretty sure this isn't a good sign.
I have also started to perhaps be more candid, talking about what I describe and what I believe to be the elephant in the room about my campaign. Essentially, is America ready for a woman and a woman of color to be president of the United States?
I think they're not ready for me might be the fourth stage of political grieving, John. I think she's in strife.
We'll get the view from on the ground in the crucial first-to-vote state, Iowa, in just a moment. But first, let's check the polls for you. And Joe Biden has actually extended his lead in the average of polls this week as support for second-place Senator Elizabeth Warren continues to cool. She's down 5.5 points now since she briefly topped the poll averages in the second week of October. Bernie Sanders remains steady at around 17 points this week. He's been consistently in a band of 14 to 18 ever since Biden got into the race in April. More than 9 points back is Buttigieg in fourth, then Kamala Harris continuing her fade, now into the fours, then Yang and O'Rourke, with Amy Klobuchar ticking up a little and Tulsi Gabbard also getting a slight bump maybe from that stoush with Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, Gabbard's now just one good poll away from making the November debate. So nice one, Hillary.
Yeah, well, this weekend marks 3 months until the first official vote of the 2020 presidential election process, the Iowa caucuses. And once again, this rural Midwestern state with a population of just over 3 million is having a big impact on who the Democratic nominee is going to be. Candidates are gathering Friday night local time in Des Moines for the annual Liberty and Justice Dinner. It used to be called the Jefferson-Jackson Dinner, so they realised, they both owned slaves. That's not a good look. Anyway, it's an event that will give a big clue as to who is doing well in Iowa ahead of the caucuses and who is not. The most influential journalist in Iowa for more than 3 decades now is David Yepsen. He was the reporter who broke that plagiarism story that sank Joe Biden's first presidential campaign way back in 1987. These days, David Yepsen is the host of the Iowa Press program, and he's with us from Des Moines. David, welcome to Planet America.
It's good to be with you.
So what are the signs you look for to see if a campaign is taking off?
It's everything. It's crowd sizes. It can be number of yard signs, the amount of enthusiasm, watching the crowd reaction to a candidate, the body language of an audience, the amount of time that the candidate spends in the state, who is supporting him or her, what do they have for an organization. Those are all the elements that go in to a successful caucus campaign. And I think the single most important is, do they have a presidential gravitas? Do they look like a president? Do you have a sense when they walk in the room, the way they carry themselves, the way they conduct themselves, that this is a person of presidential caliber? And that's a very hard thing to define and quantify. But you know it when you see it, and that you can tell a crowd can sense it too.
How important are these cattle call events like this weekend's Liberty and Justice Dinner?
Well, these events, particularly this one, is important for several reasons. Historically, it's been important. It's a gathering of all the key party faithful and activists from around the state who gather here. There's a huge media contingent. Candidates are expected to to produce. We're 3 months away from the caucus night on February 3rd. And so by this stage, most of the candidates have pretty good organizations in the state. And this is a test of those organizations. Can they get people to show up? Is there enthusiasm? And I think you add all that together and it sort of becomes a performance where a candidate has to do well at a minimum. But if you do poorly, it can hurt you. And if you do exceedingly well, it can really give your campaign a lot of energy. It creates buzz in the political community, both in Iowa and around the country. The event generates a lot of national television coverage. And in 2007, Barack Obama gave one of the most powerful speeches that I, as a political reporter, have seen in my career. And a lot of people felt the same way who were in the room at this similar dinner. It really moved him, energized his campaign, and was probably the single most important speech he gave in that campaign up to that point.
Are national issues like impeachment and the business dealings of Hunter Biden registering at all with Iowa voters?
Well, particularly with caucus goers. People who go to caucuses are political junkies. They're if you think about it, the act of going out on a cold February evening and standing around for a couple hours is a pretty high level of civic engagement. It's more than voting. It's more than just writing a check to a candidate. It's a level of commitment of time. And so these are people who are tuned to this stuff. So these national events do have an impact. One of the effects of this impeachment debate that's going on is that, and it's frustrating to a lot of Democrats, is that it is starting to crowd out some of the discussion of their campaign. You have a lot of relatively unknown candidates who need to use opportunities on news channels and in the free media to punch a message through. And now a lot of that is forked over to the coverage out of Washington, so it's frustrating for them. And if this impeachment goes, depending on how far it goes, it could take a lot of time of the U.S. senators who are presidential candidates.
What impact will the impeachment hearings have, particularly on those senators if they have to be in Washington in January rather than there in Des Moines?
Well, I think it would hurt a lot of these senators because they have to be there, but they can't really be, so they can't be here campaigning or someplace else or raising money or doing the things that candidates do right at a time when it's most important for them to do that. So there's some fear. And I think Democratic activists are of mixed feelings about this. Some feel that the impeachment process is taking away from the campaign, which I do, and it's distracting voters, and that some Americans don't like it and they want to see more issues, bread and butter issues, if you will, being discussed. Other Democratic activists say, no, this is the sort of thing we have to do. Create this impeachment proceeding, highlight President Trump's shortcomings, and that will help us defeat him. So there's a little bit of a debate inside the Democratic Party about how to approach this.
David, you've covered all three Biden presidential campaigns now in Iowa. The issue this time seems to be more his age and his political baggage. What do you make of him on the campaign trail this time?
Well, Biden has started out as the early front runner. I think that position has eroded. He's a weak front runner. It's his age. It's this talk about Hunter Biden. Donald Trump has succeeded in making Hunter Biden an issue. It wasn't the way he necessarily wanted to do it, but that's talked about. And I think that distracts from Biden's message. And sometimes Joe Biden will lose his train of thought, and it just doesn't look good. And so I think a lot of Democrats are looking around for another candidate. They like Joe Biden. Many people in Iowa know him. He's been here, as you note, a lot. But if he's a front runner at 20%, that means 80% of activist Democrats are with somebody else or are looking for an alternative. So I think the thing to watch is, I think he's sliding a little bit now. His fundraising is down. If he starts to fade and continues to fade or has a bad debate performance, who emerges to take his position as one of the centrist or moderate candidates in the race? I think that Mayor Pete Buttigieg is in that position to do that. I think U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar from nearby Minnesota is moving up. She's in a position to have a shot at that centrist Democrat. Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren more so on the left-hand side. So that's the thing I'm kind of watching for, and I think everybody is as Biden, if he falters or fades, who out of this pack of 18 other people emerges in that top tier.
Joe Biden has said that he can lose Iowa, he can lose New Hampshire and still go on to be the nominee. Is he right, or do those early states still have a big say in who is going to win?
Yeah, I disagree. First of all, I don't expect a candidate to say now, if I don't win Iowa, I'll get out of the race. But what happens is, if he should lose Iowa and or New Hampshire, his money, which is already difficult, he's running out of money, his burn rate has been pretty high. I think if money dries up, campaigns don't quit, they do run out of gas. And so I think, I disagree with Joe Biden, but I don't expect him to say anything else at this point. I think if he loses in Iowa, if he loses in New Hampshire, I think he goes into South Carolina in a much weaker position.
David Yepsen, good to see you again. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
The first inkling that we had that something very big had just happened last weekend was when the president tweeted,
"Something very big has just happened."
And the next morning we found out just how big.
Last night, the United States brought the world's #1 terrorist leader to justice.
And who's that?
Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is dead.
Who?
He was the founder and leader of ISIS, the most ruthless and violent terror organization anywhere in the world.
Okay, granted, that is a very big story. Well, not exactly a household name. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was the leader of the Islamic State group, described as just a street thug when he was first imprisoned by the US after the Iraq invasion of 2003. He was released, rose through the ranks of insurgents, gave a veneer of religious scholarship to a brutal regime, and was believed to be responsible for a number of rapes and murders, including that of American aid worker Kayla Muller. So, how did he die?
He died like a dog.
In fact, he died because of a dog. This dog.
A Belgian Malinois. We don't know its identity.
We're not releasing the name of the dog right now.
But we do know it is special.
Well, we'll tell you the dog's name. It's Conan, apparently. And it led the chase down a tunnel that saw al-Baghdadi trigger a suicide vest, killing himself and 2 children.
A beautiful dog, a talented dog. We had nobody even hurt. And that's why the dog was so great.
Okay, so we'll focus on the dog and try not to think too much about those 2 dead kids. Everybody loves a hero dog, and it's the kind of thing that I guess usually would be a unifying moment and above politics. But President Trump couldn't resist the opportunity to make it kind of about him. First, his IT skills.
You know, they use the internet better than almost anybody in the world, perhaps other than Donald Trump.
Then there was his single-minded, laser-like focus.
I've been looking at this for 3 years. They'd come in, "Sir, we have somebody under." I said, "I don't want somebody. I want al-Baghdadi. That's the one I want." They'd say, "Well, we have somebody else." I said, "That's great. Fine. Take him out. But I want al-Baghdadi. That's who I want."
And then President Trump also claimed to have been telling people to kill Osama bin Laden way before 9/11.
But nobody ever heard of Osama bin Laden until really the World Trade Center. But about a year, you'll have to check it, a year and a half before the World Trade Center came down, the book came out. I was talking about Osama bin Laden. I said, you have to kill him. You have to take him out.
Quick fact check on that one, Chaz. In his 2000 book, The America We Deserve, Donald Trump did mention Osama bin Laden, saying, "We're told one day he's public enemy #1, then he escapes, and a few news cycles later it's on to a new enemy and a new crisis." He did not call for bin Laden to be killed in that book. He did mention his name, but it was in the context of the news cycle moving on. If anything, he sounded sceptical about bin Laden, but he sure was right about the way that the news cycle moves on from one crisis to another. He's made a career from it, and we all have the America we deserve as a result.
Yes, look, Trump did get a little carried away at that presser, that's for sure. Like, for instance, this.
He died after running into a dead-end tunnel, whimpering and crying and screaming all the way.
Now, it's highly unlikely that Trump heard Baghdadi actually whimpering because his live stream apparently didn't have audio. Mind you, everyone makes mistakes. Take this obituary headline from the Washington Post that labelled Baghdadi an austere religious scholar. Now that was a mistake. It's a good thing the Washington Post wasn't in charge of Ivan Milat's obituary. That could have been very unfortunate. But to be fair to the Washington Post, a lot of people like to talk down moments like this, which leads us to our new, sure-to-be frequent segment.
There's always a tweet.
From 2012.
Stop congratulating Obama for killing bin Laden. The Navy SEALs killed bin Laden.
Sure, presidential worship can get out of hand, but there's something to be said for a perfectly executed operation, like this was. Not only did they get ISIS's #1, but they got ISIS's #2 as well. So let's give credit where it's due. To that dog. By contrast, I'm not so sure about Trump's latest plans for the troops.
We're out, but we are leaving soldiers to secure the oil. Now, we may have to fight for the oil. That's okay. Maybe somebody else wants the oil, in which case they have a hell of a fight.
We're talking 500 troops just to guard oil fields, 900 in Syria overall, which is basically how many troops there were there in the first place. And let's not forget that those troops aren't even there legally. So how America can legally justify taking over a bunch of Syrian oil fields is a bit of a mystery to me, especially as they just got done saying they're not going to fight for the Kurds, but they will fight to steal another country's oil? I think I need a palate cleanser. Oh, that's better. To take us to the break, a reminder of just how much Trump didn't want to give Obama any credit for the death of bin Laden.
But I don't know why Obama gets credit for the whole bin Laden thing. The military did an incredible job. And they called him and they said, we have him. And he said, go get him. What's he going to say? Don't get him? And he gets all this credit? It's a lot of crap.
While most of the world's attention was focused on Syria this month, an American delegation quietly made its way to Greenland, featuring officials from the National Security Council and the Pentagon to discuss with locals and the Danes areas of current and future cooperation. There are plenty of those. You'll of course remember this story from August about the president wanting to buy Greenland. It led to a minor diplomatic incident. But there is a much broader push going on towards the Arctic at the moment. The Arctic currently consists of 8 countries: Russia, Canada, America through Alaska, Denmark through Greenland, Finland, Sweden, Norway and Iceland. But everyone wants a piece of it because it's got all kinds of goodies, like 30% of the world's undiscovered natural gas, $1 trillion in rare earth minerals, not to mention the potential for vastly shorter shipping routes. For example, shipping from Tokyo to Rotterdam currently involves a journey of 9,500 nautical miles. But through the Arctic, that's less than 7,000 nautical miles. That saves weeks of time and money. The thing is though, most of these goodies are currently inaccessible because they're buried under tons of ice. Unfortunately, that may not be the case for long. The Arctic's now a place where heat waves and wildfires happen. They're experiencing some of the hottest summers for 115,000 years. Their permafrost is melting 70 years earlier than expected. So all that ice is starting to grow thinner. Now, America is aware of this. That's why the Pentagon, the Navy, and the US Coast Guard have all put out reports about it this year. But Russia in particular has a huge advantage in exploiting this region. Apart from its significant physical presence, Russia has 14 icebreakers and has built 6 Arctic bases in 6 years, compared to America, which has 1 large and 1 medium icebreaker and has almost no Arctic facilities. And now China is moving in as well with its Polar Silk Road initiative aimed at opening up some of those shipping lanes from East Asia that we spoke about before. So to find out what this all means going forward, we've got Johns Hopkins Uni's Global Affairs Professor Hal Brands. Hal, what kind of human presence is there in the Arctic right now, and how is that likely to change over the next few decades?
Well, the human presence in the Arctic is growing in the sense that the Arctic is becoming more accessible to a variety of human activities, whether that is settlement in some cases or more to the point, commerce. Climate change is really changing the physical geography of the Arctic in a significant way. And as it does so, it's making possible commercial activities that weren't possible before, both in the form of mineral and resource exploitation that was locked away under ice before, and more importantly even in the form of opening up shipping routes that were not open before.
So what would you say is the most valuable prize up there? Is it the mining potential, or is it the direct shipping route, or is it some other factor?
Well, it's hard to say in a numerical sense, just because we only have estimates of the sorts of subsea minerals and resources that are available. It's clear that the shipping routes are incredibly valuable, because if you are going from ports in East Asia to ports in Western Europe, for instance, that it can cut the shipping time if you go north by about 2 weeks in some cases. And so that's incredibly valuable from a commercial perspective, and is clearly increasing the strategic value of the Arctic as well.
Those minerals that we think are up for grabs in the north, what would they be useful for?
Well, one of the minerals that's often talked about are rare earth minerals, which are critical to a variety of commercial and military uses, and have been in the news recently because China currently controls a large portion of the world's supply of rare earth minerals. And so to the extent that there are new supplies available, and to the extent that the United States and its allies are getting deeper into competition with China as well as Russia, presumably that's a significant prize.
Now, if we turn the North Pole into a shipping route, surely that would have massive environmental ramifications.
It's more in the vein that the environmental ramifications are making it possible to use northern sea routes. And so the northern route around Russia, for instance, used to be mostly inaccessible. It's becoming more and more accessible, particularly during the summer, as more ice melts and temperatures rise. And so yes, you will get some environmental impact from the increased passage of ships through the region and the debris that they can sometimes leave behind. But the real environmental fallout is being caused by climate change, which is having a massive impact on the ecology of the Arctic and on both the human and animal populations that live there.
Hal, I look at the Arctic on a map and I see Russia, I see Canada, I see America through Alaska, I see Denmark through Greenland, but why is China involved? What does China have to do with the Arctic?
Well, China has decided that it is an Arctic power, even though it's not an Arctic power by virtue of geography. And China essentially created a new category of country, which no one had heard of before, called a near-Arctic power, to express the idea that while it doesn't have Arctic frontage, it believes it does have interest and it does have a stake in the Arctic, and it is increasingly trying to make its presence felt in the Arctic through commercial exploration, through military presence, as its power grows. And so China has become an observer at the Arctic Council, and it's increasingly arguing that it indeed has a stake and it needs to be consulted on decisions relating to the disposition of the Arctic.
So Hal, when would be the time frame that we could expect these issues to really heat up?
We're already seeing it right now, and we're already seeing increased shipping traffic through the Arctic, particularly during the summer months. We're already seeing an increased Russian military presence in the Arctic, and we're already seeing the United States start to respond, slowly and inadequately, but responding nonetheless.
If there is a battle for the Arctic, surely Russia has a massive geographic advantage over everyone else.
Potentially, yes. Russia has more Arctic frontage, certainly, than the United States does, and it has far more military assets within proximity to the Arctic than the United States currently does. But one of the reasons why the Russians take this so seriously is that they also perceive vulnerabilities in the Arctic, and they worry that this could potentially be a new front that they might have to defend. They see mostly advantages there in the sense that the lack of warm water ports, or the lack of ports that are accessible during the winter, ice-free ports on Russia's northern coast, has long been considered a geopolitical handicap for the country, but it's not entirely an unmixed bag from their perspective.
So where did the Greenland controversy fit into all this? Did Trump undermine American strategy during all that?
So the Greenland controversy is interesting, and there's a little bit of a kernel there in the sense that the United States does need to be doing more with Greenland in a variety of contexts, particularly vis-a-vis both sort of Arctic interests and interest in the North Atlantic. It probably wasn't the right way to go about it to suggest that the United States should buy Greenland when most Greenlanders have no interest in that, and it certainly wasn't the right way to go about it to cancel a meeting with the leadership of Denmark and to essentially throw a Twitter fit after it became clear that there was no interest on the other side in pursuing this transaction. I don't think that this is going to have a massive impact on day-to-day working level cooperation between the United States and its allies, but it certainly hasn't helped the political climate at the very top of those relationships.
Is the Arctic basically about to become the new Middle East?
I don't know what you mean by that.
Oh, in terms of being a very hotly contested geopolitical spot that's critical for resource extraction and shipping routes, you know, like the Persian Gulf is.
The Arctic is not going to become the Arctic has not become as contested a zone as, say, the South China Sea or the Persian Gulf or other areas in which the United States and its competitors are clashing. But it is becoming certainly far more contested than it was, say, 15 or 20 years ago. After the end of the Cold War, the Arctic basically became a geopolitical afterthought for the United States in particular. It's certainly not going to be an afterthought in the years ahead.
Hal Brands, thanks for visiting Planet America.
Thank you.
Now to a president who was controversially elected after losing the popular vote, leading many to question his legitimacy. He was able to overcome an enthusiastic opposition party to win a second term, but not before one of the ugliest campaigns in history. This is the story of the re-election of George W. Bush and the lessons it might hold for Donald Trump. May the 1st, 2003, almost 20 months after the 9/11 attacks, less than 6 weeks after the US-led invasion of Iraq, Saddam Hussein has been deposed and America's 43rd president is about to declare mission accomplished. In a dramatic made-for-TV scene, America's Commander-in-Chief lands on the deck of the aircraft carrier, the USS Abraham Lincoln, off the coast of California and emerges in a flight suit to the cheers of sailors.
Major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
The liberator of Iraq on board a warship named after America's great emancipator. It served as a bookend for another powerful moment of president as action hero when Bush clambered over the still smouldering ruins of the World Trade Center 3 days after 9/11 to vow America's revenge.
I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
That had been planned as a photo op, but in the moment, grabbing the megaphone off script, President Bush had spoken for a nation. On September the 10th, 2001, President Bush's approval rating had slipped to the lowest point of his 8-month presidency, 51%. A week later, it was up by 35 points. The following week, Bush had a 90% approval rating, and his approval remained strong throughout 2002 and during the early phase of the Iraq operation in 2003. But from the moment Bush declared mission accomplished, things seemed to start going wrong. Saddam was alive and still in hiding. America and their allies, including Australia, were not being hailed as liberators. The Bush administration had failed to properly plan for the aftermath. The weapons of mass destruction that had provided the rationale for the invasion were nowhere to be found. Sectarian violence exploded. The mission was far from accomplished. Back in the United States, opposition to the war was growing, fueling the presidential campaign of progressive Democrat Howard Dean.
The administration launched the war in a wrong way at the wrong time.
But in mid-December, Saddam was captured. Support for the war improved. Howard Dean's campaign faltered, and Senator John Kerry emerged as the Democratic nominee.
I'm John Kerry, and I'm reporting for duty.
Heading into the summer of 2004, Kerry was leading Bush in the polls. He was calling for a new approach to win the war in Iraq and restore America's place in the world. But he wasn't making any promises.
If we do not try, failure is all too likely and too costly.
John Kerry wasn't the most exciting candidate. Patrician, even dour. Still, he had a certain gravitas, but the Bush re-election team saw an opening. That same Gallup poll that had Kerry leading by 8 points showed voters were concerned he was more likely to change his mind for political reasons. Kerry had been a hero in Vietnam, commanding a Navy swift boat. But he came home and criticised the war before Congress and on TV. He voted in favour of the Iraq invasion, but was now critical of how it was being handled. In short, John Kerry could be painted as a flip-flopper and not a true leader.
In which direction would John Kerry lead? Kerry voted for the Iraq War, opposed it, supported it, and now opposes it again. John Kerry, whichever way the wind blows.
But it was an outside political group with ties to the Bush campaign, calling itself the Swift Boat Veterans for Truth, that went for John Kerry's jugular.
John Kerry has not been honest, and he lacks the capacity to lead.
When the chips were down, you could not count on John Kerry.
John Kerry is no war hero.
John Kerry cannot be trusted.
A series of Swift Boat ads not only cast doubt on Kerry's leadership and truthfulness, even though the ads themselves were hugely distorted, and many of the veterans featured in it never served with Kerry or only for a short time. At first, John Kerry tried to ignore the ads, then tried to dispute them.
And the fact that the president won't denounce what they're up to tells you everything that you need to know. He wants them to do his dirty work.
Meanwhile, the official Bush campaign was playing on fears about another 9/11 style attack. Or maybe just the fear of being attacked by wolves.
John Kerry and the Liberals in Congress voted to slash America's intelligence operations by $6 billion. Cuts so deep they would have weakened America's defenses. And weakness attracts those who are waiting to do America harm.
For several crucial months in the summer of 2004, the Kerry campaign didn't respond with commercials of their own, wanting to save their money for the final run to November. After all, Bush had avoided military service in Vietnam. John Kerry had a chest full of medals. But still, the damage was done. The Bush campaign and their Swift Boat surrogates successfully smeared their rival and also reminded Americans how they felt about President Bush in those days after 9/11. Come November, it was another close result, but George W. Bush achieved something his father had not: re-election to a second term.
I see a great day coming for our country, and I am eager for the work ahead.
4 years later, and America and its allies were still mired in Iraq. Hundreds of thousands of civilians and service members were dead, and a Democrat who had opposed the war all along would replace President Bush. Some presidents like Reagan and Clinton have gone to their re-election able to say things were better than they'd been 4 years ago. George W. Bush could not say that, but he could warn against the alternative with an unrelentingly negative campaign. That approach also worked for Barack Obama over Mitt Romney in 2012. We'll soon see which strategy President Trump employs in 2020. And that is all for another trip to Planet America.
Yes, we've got lots more in the extra as always, which you can find here. See you there.
Bye-bye.